Welcome to Year 4 Storytime, Home Edition, where we are carrying on with the Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman. This is part 5, and we're beginning with chapter 3. The Hounds of God. One grave in every graveyard belongs to the ghouls. Wander any graveyard long enough and you will find it. Water-stained and bulging, with cracked or broken stone, scraggly grass or rank weeds about it, and a feeling, when you reach it, of abandonment. It may be colder than the other gravestones too, and the name on the stone is all too often impossible to read. If there is a statue on the grave, it will be headless or so scabbed with fungus and lichens as to look like a fungus itself. If one grave in the graveyard looks like a target for petty vandals, that is the ghoul gate. If the grave makes you want to be somewhere else, that is the ghoul gate. There was one in Bod's graveyard. There is one in every graveyard. Silas was leaving. Silas was leaving. Bod had been upset by this when he had first learned about it. He was no longer upset. He was furious. It says grizzle. He was no longer upset. He was furious. But why? Said Bod. I told you I need to obtain some information. In order to do that, I have to travel. To travel, I must leave here. We've already been all over all this. What's so important that you have to go away? Bod's 6-year-old mind tried to imagine something that could make Silas want to leave him, and failed. It's not fair. His guardian was unperturbed. It is neither fair nor unfair, nobody owns. It simply is. Bod was not impressed. You're meant to look after me. You said. As your guardian, I have responsibility for you, yes. Fortunately, I am not the only individual in the world willing to take on this responsibility. Where are you going, anyway? Out. There are things that I need to uncover that I cannot uncover here. Bod snorted and walked off, kicking at imaginary stones. On the northwestern side of the graveyard, things had become very overgrown and tangled, far beyond the ability of the groundsman or the friends of the graveyard to tame. And he ambled over there and woke a family of Victorian children who had all died before their 10th birthdays, and they played at hide-and-go-seek in the moonlight in the ivy-twined jungle. Bod tried to pretend that Silas was not leaving, that nothing was going to change. But when the game was over, he ran back to the old chapel. He saw two things that changed his mind. The first thing he saw was a bag. It was, Bod knew the moment he laid eyes on it, Silas's bag. It was at least 150 years old, a thing of beauty, black leather with brass fittings and a black handle, the kind of bag a Victorian doctor or undertaker might have carried, containing every implement that might have been needed. Bod had never seen Silas's bag before. He had not even known that Silas had a bag, but it was the sort of bag that could only have belonged to Silas. Bod tried to peek inside it, but it was closed with a large brass padlock. It was too heavy for him to lift. That was the first thing. The second thing was sitting on the bench by the chapel. Bod, said Silas, this is Miss Lepescu. Miss Lepescu was not pretty. Her face was pinched and her expression was disapproving. Her hair was grey, although her face seemed too young for grey hair. Her front teeth were slightly crooked. She wore a bulky mackintosh and a man's tie around her neck. How do you do, Miss Lepescu? Said Bod. Miss Lepescu said nothing. She sniffed, then she looked at Silas and said, So, this is the boy. She got up from her seat and walked all around Bod, nostrils flared as if she was sniffing him. When she had made a complete circuit, she said, You will report to me on waking and before you go to sleep. I have rented a room in a house over there. She pointed to a roof just visible from where they stood. However, I shall spend my time in this graveyard. I am here as a historian, researching the history of old graves. You understand, boy? Da? Bod, said Bod. It's Bod, not boy. Short for nobody, she said. A foolish name. Also, Bod is a pet name, a nickname. I do not approve. I will call you boy. You will call me Miss Lepescu. Bod looked up at Silas pleadingly, but there was no sympathy on Silas's face. He picked up his bag and said, You will be in good hands with Miss Lepescu, Bod. I am sure the two of you will get on. We won't, said Bod. She's horrible. That, said Silas, was a very rude thing to say. I think you should apologise, don't you? Bod didn't, but Silas was looking at him, and he was carrying a black bag, and he was about to leave for no one knew how long. So he said, I'm sorry, Miss Lepescu. At first she said nothing in reply. She merely sniffed. Then she said, I have come a long way to look after you, boy. I hope you are worth it. Bod could not imagine hugging Silas, so he held out his hand, and Silas bent over and gently shook it, engulfing Bod's small grubby hand with his huge pale one. Then, lifting his black leather bag as if it were weightless, he walked down the path and out of the graveyard. Bod told his parents about it. Silas is gone, he said. He'll be back, said Mr. Owens cheerfully. Don't you worry your head about that, Bod. Like a bad penny, as they say. Mrs. Owens said, Back when you were born, he promised us that if he had to leave, he would find someone else to bring you food and keep an eye on you, and he has. He's so dependable. Silas had bought Bod food, true, and left it in the crypt each night for him to eat, but this was, as far as Bod was concerned, the least of the things Silas did for him. He gave advice, cool, sensible, and unfailingly correct. He knew more than the graveyard folk did, for his nightly excursions into the world meant that he was able to describe a world that was current, not hundreds of years out of date. He was unflappable and reliable, and had been there every night of Bod's life, so the idea of the little chapel without its only inhabitant was one that Bod found difficult to conceive of. Most of all, he made Bod feel safe. Miss Lepescu also saw her job as more than bringing Bod food. She did that too, though. What is that? Asked Bod, horrified. Good food, said Miss Lepescu. They were in the crypt. She had put 2 plastic containers on the tabletop and opened the lids. She pointed to the first. Is beetroot barley stew soup. She pointed to the second. Is salad. Now, you eat both. I make them for you. Bod stared up at her to see if this was a joke. Food from Silas mostly came in packets purchased from the kind of places that sold food late at night and asked no questions. No one had ever bought him food in a plastic container with a lid before. It smells horrible, he said. If you do not eat the stew soup soon, she said, it will be more horrible. It will be cold. Now eat. Bod was hungry. He took a plastic spoon, dipped it into the purple-red stew, and he ate. The food was slimy and unfamiliar, but he kept it down. Now the salad, said Miss Lepescu as she unpopped the top of the second container. It consisted of large lumps of raw onion, beetroot, and tomato, all in a thick, vinegary dressing. Bod put a lump of beetroot into his mouth and started to chew. He could feel the saliva gathering and realised that if he swallowed it, he would throw it back up. He said, I can't eat this. It's good for you. I'll be sick. They stared at each other, the small boy with tousled mousy hair, the pinched pale woman with not a silver hair out of place. Miss Lepescu said, You eat one more piece. I can't. You eat one more piece now or you stay here until you've eaten it all. Bod picked out a piece of vinegary tomato, chewed it and choked it down. Miss Lepescu put the tops back on the containers and replaced them in the plastic shopping bag. She said, Now, lessons. It was high summer. It would not get fully dark until almost midnight. There were no lessons in high summer. The time that Bod spent awake he spent in an endless warm twilight in which he would play or explore or climb. Lessons? He said. Your guardian felt it would be good for me to teach you things. I have teachers. Letitia Burrows teaches me writing and words, and Mr. Pennyworth teaches me his complete educational system for younger gentlemen with additional material for those post-mortem. I do geography and everything. I don't need more lessons. You know everything then, boy. 6 years old and you know everything. I didn't say that. Miss Lepescu folded her arms. Tell me about ghouls, she said. Bod tried to remember what Silas had told him about ghouls over the years. Keep away from them, he said. And that is all you know? Duh. Why do you keep away from them? Where do they come from? Where do they go? Why do you not stand near a ghoul gate? Eh, boy? Bod shrugged and shook his head. Name the different kinds of people, said Miss Lepescu. Now. Bod thought for a moment. The living? He said. The dead? He stopped. Then, cats? He offered uncertainly. You are ignorant, boy, said Miss Lepescu. This is bad. You are content to be ignorant, which is worse. Repeat after me. There are the living and the dead. There are day folk and night folk. There are ghouls and mist walkers. And there are high hunters and the hounds of God. Also, there are solitary types. What are you? Asked Bod. I, she said sternly, am Miss Lepescu. And what's Silas? She hesitated. Then she said, he is a solitary type. Bod endured the lesson. When Silas taught him things, it was interesting. Much of the time, Bod didn't realise he'd been taught anything at all. Miss Lepescu taught in lists, and Bod could not see the point to it. He sat in the crypt, aching to be out in the summer's twilight under the ghost moon. When the lesson was over, in the foulest of moods, he fled. He looked for playmates, but found no one, and saw nothing but a large grey dog which prowled the gravestones, always keeping its distance from him, slipping between gravestones and through shadows. The week got worse. Miss Lepescu continued to bring Bod things she had cooked for him, dumplings swimming in lard, thick reddish-purple soup with a lump of sour cream in it, small, cold, boiled potatoes, cold, garlic-heavy sausages, hard-boiled eggs in a grey, unappetising liquid. He ate as little as he could get away with. The lessons continued. For 2 days she taught him nothing but ways to call for help in every language in the world, and she would rap his knuckles with her pen if he slipped up or forgot. By the 3rd day she was firing them at him. French, au secours, Morse code, SOS, 3 short dots, 3 long ones, 3 short ones again. Night gaunt. This is stupid. I don't remember what a night gaunt is. They have hairless wings and they fly low and fast. They do not visit this world, but they fly the red skies above the road to Gulheim. I'm never going to need to know this. Her mouth pinched in tighter. All she said was, night gaunt. Bod made a noise in the back of his throat that she had taught him, a guttural cry like an eagle's call. She sniffed. Adequate. She said. Bod could not wait until the day that Silas would return. He said, there's a big grey dog in our graveyard sometimes. It came when you did. Is it your dog? Miss Lepescu straightened her tie. No, she said. Are we finished? For today. You will read the list I gave you tonight and remember them for tomorrow. The lists were printed in pale purple ink on white paper, and they smelled odd. Bod took the new list up onto the side of the hill and tried to read the words, but his attention kept sliding off it. Eventually he folded it up and placed it beneath a stone. No one would play with him that night. No one wanted to play or to talk or to run or climb beneath the huge summer moon. He went down to the Owens' tomb to complain to his parents, but Mrs. Owens would not hear a word against Miss Lepescu on, as far as Bod was concerned, the unfair grounds that Silas had chosen her, while Mr. Owens simply shrugged and started telling Bod about his days as a young apprentice cabinetmaker and how much he would have loved to learn about all the useful things that Bod was learning, which was, as far as Bod was concerned, even worse. Aren't you meant to be studying anyway? Asked Mrs. Owens, and Bod squeezed his fists together and said nothing. He stomped off into the graveyard, feeling unloved and underappreciated. Bod brooded on the injustice of it all and wandered through the graveyard, kicking at stones. He spotted the dark grey dog and called it to see if it would come over and play with him, but it kept its distance, and Bod, frustrated, threw a clump of mud towards it, which broke on a nearby gravestone and scattered earth everywhere. The big dog gazed at Bod reproachfully and stepped away into the shadows and was gone. The boy walked back down the southwest side of the hill, avoiding the old chapel. He did not want to see the place that Silas wasn't. Bod stopped beside a grave that looked the way he felt. It was beneath an old oak tree that had once been struck by lightning and now was just a black trunk, like a sharp talon coming out of the hill. The grave itself was water-stained and cracked, and above it was a memorial stone on which a headless angel hung, its robes looking like huge and ugly tree fungus. Bod sat down on a clump of grass and felt sorry for himself and hated everybody. He even hated Silas for going away and leaving him. Then he closed his eyes and curled into a ball on the grass and drifted into a dreamless sleep. Down the street and up the hill came the Duke of Westminster, the Honourable Archibald Fitzhugh, and the Bishop of Bath and Wells, slipping and bounding from shadow to shadow, lean and leathery, all sinews and cartilage, wearing raggedy clothes all a-tatter, and they bounded and loped and skulked and leapfrogging over dustbins, keeping to the dark side of hedges. They were small, like full-sized people who had shrunk in the sun. They spoke to each other in undertones, saying things like, "If your Grace has any more blooming idea of where we is than us do, I'd be grateful if you'd say so. Otherwise he should keep his big offal hole shut. And all I'm saying, your worship, is that I knows there's a graveyard near to here. I can smell it. And if you could smell it, then I should have been able to smell it, because I've got a better nose than you have, your grace. All this as they dodged and wove their way through suburban gardens. They avoided one garden. Psst! Hissed the Honourable Archibald Fitzhugh. Dogs! And ran along the top of the garden wall, scampering over it like rats the size of children. Down into the high street and up the road to the top of the hill, and then they were at the graveyard wall, and they went up it like squirrels up a tree, and they sniffed the air. Where, dog? Said the Duke of Westminster. Where? I don't know. Somewhere round here. Doesn't smell like a proper dog anyway, said the Bishop of Bath and Wells. Somebody couldn't smell this graveyard neither, said the Honourable Archibald Fitzhugh. Remember, it's just a dog. The three of them leapt down from the wall to the ground, and they ran, using their arms as much as their legs, to propel themselves through the graveyard to the Ghoul Gate by the lightning tree. And beside the gate, in the moonlight, they paused. What's this when it's at home, then? Asked the Bishop of Bath and Wells. Said the Duke of Westminster. Bod woke then. The three faces staring into his could have been those of mummified humans, fleshless and dried, but their features were mobile and interested, mouths that grinned to reveal sharp stained teeth, bright beady eyes, clawed fingers that moved and tapped. Who are you? Bod asked. We, said one of the creatures. They were, Bod realised, only a little bigger than he was. Is the most important folk, we is. This here is the Duke of Westminster. The biggest of the creatures gave a bow, saying, Charmed, I'm sure. And this is the Bishop of Bath and Wells? The creature, which grinned sharp teeth and let a pointed tongue of improbable length waggle between them, did not look like Bod's idea of a bishop. Its skin was piebald and had a large spot across one eye, making it look almost piratical. And I have the honour to be the Honourable Archibald Fitzhugh, at your service. The three creatures bowed as one. The Bishop of Bath and Wells said, Now me, lad, what's your story, eh? And don't tell any porkies, remember as how you're talking to a bishop. You tell him, your worship, said the other two. So Bod told them. He told them how no one liked him or wanted to play with him, how no one appreciated him or cared, or how even his guardian had abandoned him. Blow me down, said the Duke of Westminster, scratching his nose, a little dried-up thing that was mostly nostrils. What you need is to go somewhere where the people would appreciate you. There isn't anywhere, said Bod, and I'm not allowed out of the graveyard. You needs an old world of friends and playfellows, said the Bishop of Bath and Wells, wiggling his long tongue, a city of delights, of fun and magic, where you would be appreciated, not ignored. Bod said, The lady who's looking after me, she makes horrible food, hard-boiled egg soup and things. Food? Said the Honourable Archibald Fitzhugh. Where we're going, the food's the best in the whole world. Makes me tum rumble with me mouth water just thinking about it. Can I come with you? Asked Bod. Come with us? Said the Duke of Westminster. He sounded shocked. Don't be like that, your grace, said the Bishop of Bath and Wells. Have a blink in art. Look at the little mite. Hadn't had a decent meal in he don't know how long. I vote to take him, said the Honourable Archibald Fitzhugh. There's good grub back at our place. He patted his stomach to show just how good the food was. So, you game for adventure? Asked the Duke of Westminster, won over by the novel idea. Or do you want to waste the rest of your life here? And with bony fingers he indicated the graveyard at the night. Bod thought of Miss Lepescu and her awful food and her lists and her pinched mouth. I'm game, he said. His three new friends might have been his size, but they were far stronger than any child, and Bod found himself picked up by the Bishop of Bath and Wells and held high above the creature's head, while the Duke of Westminster grabbed a handful of mangy-looking grass, shouted what looked like "Ska! Teth! Kava!" and pulled. The stone slab that covered the grave swung open like a trapdoor, revealing the darkness revealing a darkness beneath. Quick now, said the Duke, and the Bishop of Bath and Wells tossed Bod into the dark opening and then leapt in after him, followed by the Honourable Archibald Fitzhugh, and then, with one agile bound, by the Duke of Westminster, who, as soon as he was inside, called out, Weg Carlos, to close the Ghoul Gate, and the stone crashed down above them. Bod fell, tumbling through the darkness like a lump of marble, too startled to be scared, wondering how deep the hole beneath the grave could possibly be, when two strong hands caught him beneath the armpits and he found himself swinging forward through pitch blackness. Bod had not experienced total darkness for many years. In the graveyard he saw as the Dead Sea, and no tomb or grave or crypt was truly dark to him. Now he was in utter darkness, feeling himself being pitched forward in a sequence of jerks and rushes, the wind rushing past him. It was frightening, but it was also exhilarating. And then there was light, and everything changed. The sky was red, but not the warm red of a sunset. This was an angry, glowering red, the red of an infected wound. The sun was small and seemed like it was old and distant. The air was cold and they were descending a wall. Tombstones and statues jutted out the side of the wall as if a huge graveyard had been upended, and like three wizened chimpanzees in tattered black suits that did up at the back, the Duke of Westminster, the Bishop of Bath and Wells, and the Honourable Archibald Fitzhugh were swinging from statue to stone, dangling Bod between them as they went, tossing him from one to the other, never missing him, always catching him with ease, without even looking. Bod tried to look up to see the grave through which they had entered this strange world, but he could see nothing but headstones. He wondered if each of the graves they were swinging past was a door for the kind of people who were carrying him. "Where are we going?" he asked, but his voice was whipped away by the wind. They went faster and faster. Up ahead of them, Bod saw a statue swing up, and another two creatures came catapulting out into this crimson-skied world, just like the ones that carried Bod. One wore a raggedy silken gown and looked like it had once been white. The other wore a stained grey suit too large for it, the sleeves of which were shredded into shadowy tatters. They followed Bod and his three new friends and made for them, dropping 20 feet with ease. The Duke of Westminster gave a guttural squawk and pretended to be scared, and Bod and the three of them swung down the wall of graves and the two new creatures in pursuit. None of them seemed to get tired or out of breath under that red sky, with the burnt-out sun gazing down at them like a dead eye. But eventually they fetched up on the side of the huge statue of a creature whose whole face seemed to have become a fungoid growth. Bod found himself being introduced to the 33rd President of the United States and the Emperor of China. "This is Master Bod," said the Bishop of Bath and Wells. "He's going to become one of us." "He's in search of a good meal," said the Honourable Archibald Fitzhugh. "Well, you're guaranteed fine dining when you becomes one of us, young lad," said the Emperor of China. "Yep," said the 33rd President of the United States. Bod said, "I become one of you? You mean I'll turn into you?" "Smart as a whip, sharp as a tack. You'd have to get up pretty late at night to put anything past this lad," said the Bishop of Bath and Wells. "Indeed, one of us. As strong, as fast, as unconquerable. Teeth so strong they can crush any bones, and tongue sharp and long enough to lick the marrow from the deepest marrow bone, or lay the flesh from a fat man's face," said the Emperor of China. "Able to slip from shadow to shadow, never seen, never suspected, free as air, fast as thought, cold as frost, hard as nails. Dangerous as us," said the Duke of Westminster. Bod looked at the creatures. "But what if I don't want to be one of you?" he said. What indeed? And we'll find out next time.